Hello and welcome to This Is Not an Episode, a now weekly podcast about where philosophy meets the world, quietly, awkwardly, and sometimes all too loudly. Each episode explores how philosophical ideas surface in public life, from fashion and faith to AI and funding policies. And I am Jonathan Talent. I am a professor of philosophy at the University of Nottingham. And Andy Fisher, who are you?
I'm Andy Fisher and also a professor of philosophy at the University of Nottingham.
Good to talk to you again, Andy. What have you been up to this week?
Oh, lots of exciting things. I think one interesting thing I did was I went into two local sixth forms to talk to students there. And I always like getting out of the university into the community and delivering philosophy. So I did a bit of here's how whizzy and interesting philosophy is, but also answering some questions on why bother doing philosophy. So talking about the careers and talking about the prospects it gives you. So that was really interesting and energizing. Yeah. What about you?
That sounds great. So I think one of the things I really enjoyed about this week was also getting some contacts outside the university. Had a catch up with some partners at Notts County Football Club. There's a relationship between the university and Notts County, and we were having a great chat about educational opportunities for our students, for ways in which we can support county, they can support us. Really lovely, collaborative, inventive conversations. As you say, energizing to have those, which is all good.
Yeah, did you get to kick a ball around at all?
No, we met on university campus, so I wasn't able to dazzle anyone with my appalling lack of skills, which I think was probably for the best for my career, that no one ever actually sees that. And you've changed your background, Andy.
Yeah, this is my stock boring office background that I got from Teams. Actually, is my office. So yeah,
which is your office.
A stock boring background.
Yeah. Well, that will have gone over exceptionally well for anyone who's listening to this and not watching it. Excellent injection of humour there, and I'm going to really leadenly move us to something you've been reading this week, which is about using humour to spark deep thinking in philosophy.
Yeah, this was really interesting. This is a piece I read by Margaret Betts on her thinking about teaching philosophy and her foray into using humour in the classroom to try and, well, first relax the students, make them less anxious, make them chilled out, which I thought that seems fair enough. I've got some worries, which I'll mention in a minute. But then there's also this idea that it can somehow help a deeper thinking in some way philosophically. There wasn't much details on that and how it worked, but I think it's the idea of seeing things from different perspectives, perhaps something like that. And she was talking about, let me just find it. She talked about using memes in the classroom. So funny memes about philosophy can serve as a fun classroom exercise that deepens students' understanding of the material. I'm just like really skeptical. So I'm skeptical because I think the quickest way to make someone realize they're out of touch is if they try and not be out of touch. That's one of my reasons. And you must have this. Teaching, I've used what I think is some relevant cultural examples, and then you just get these blank looks, and you think, "Yeah, I am so out of date," and the language and all that sort of stuff. And even talking to my daughters, I'm so out. I think I'd be very worried about trying to do this. What about you? Do you ever, in your teaching, try and add humour intentionally? I think that's the point.
So I don't think I ever deliberately try and structure comedy into my teaching or humor into my teaching, but inevitably I'll be halfway through a lecture and some appalling pun or joke will occur to me, and I occasionally I can't help but resist, just lean into it a little bit, or I'll throw in some pop culture reference and then stare at the blank faces in front of me. And then wind up setting them homework that they have to go and watch this movie that came out 30 years ago that they've never heard of. So yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I guess one of the things, the memes I was wondering about, and maybe this is too charitable, so let me know what you think, is the idea of using memes that kind of stereotype philosophy or philosophical positions, and then asking the students, all right, haha, this is funny and everything because it's a meme about Socrates being that irritating questioner, right? But actually, how do we move beyond that to see what's really going on here? Because if I can imagine, I remember being a student and you would kind of come up with those memes for yourselves and then stop there and you wouldn't try and push beyond them. I just wonder if that in funnel in is a interesting pedagogical tool, or am I being too generous?
Um, I
I'm being
think
too
you're being
generous.
I think, I mean, the reason is because I think that spins independently of being funny and humorous. I think it's an interesting exercise, right? So, and you know, I've seen it done in history where you look at stereotypes and caricatures or propaganda and things and say what's actually being said here. And I can imagine memes being used that way. And actually, she gives example of the cover of the Leviathan, Hobbes's Leviathan, and asking what's going on there, and that's interesting. But that seems to be a different exercise than trying to bring humor into the classroom.
Yeah.
And the other thing I thought about this is that I'd have a worry that humor in some sense is a bit of the Wild West, because it feels like when you're doing humor, you can introduce things which you probably wouldn't, oh, is only joking, that sort of thing. And that sort of pushing at those social norms in sort of at the pub or whatever. But in a classroom, that's a bit hard to regulate. So I thought that was another thing which would be interesting to investigate. I think it's interesting. I'm not convinced personally as an educator. For me, it would do anything, and it probably caused me a lot more problems. I don't. Yeah. So yeah. So I'd have to think about how to make that decision on whether to use it or not. And you've read something about decision making, so will that help me?
It might. So this was a really interesting piece that it's a psychologist and a philosopher on how to make better choices. And what they do to start with is they introduce rational decision making kind of a model and rational choice theory. And they say, right, okay, so look, here's how you can scaffold a decision. You can think about likely outcomes. You can think about benefits and costs that flow from decisions. And then you line up all of the different options in front of you and you choose the one that maximizes your outcomes. And then that's the rational thing to do. And they talk through examples where that might be a useful and interesting kind of thing to do. And they talk about the history of this approach to things. And at that point, I was like, okay, yeah, I've read this 100 times before, whatever, this is fine. And then say, actually, that's rubbish. We should not be doing that all of the time. Actually, I need to come back to that. What they lean into is this idea that there is, in quite a lot of decision making, a really important qualitative element to the decision. And they say they ask a bunch of rhetorical questions around, can you assign a value to everything? Should you try and assign a value to everything? Actually, isn't something really important about decision making, not just lining up a bunch of probabilities and a bunch of expected outcomes and saying that one? It's about feeling and thinking your way through. That's what being a rational decision maker is. So rational choice theory is a dangerous normative standard. Rah. And what I wanted to, I mean, it's a short article talking about something much more in depth. I guess I just wanted to push ever so slightly back and say, yeah, look, sometimes, right, but surely these are two different tools that we should be using in a kind of a symbiotic way. You do the rational assignation of values and outcomes, and then you have a feel your way through it. Both of those things are going to be important. But I don't know. Are you going to tell me that I'm wrong, and what I should actually be doing when I'm deciding between these options is working out the cost benefit analysis and then doing the one which is the best?
No, not at all. It seems right, and I'm reminded of the Laurie Paul work on transformative experience stuff. And it strikes me that we have this really self-important notion that we can just work out what things are going to be, and but actually often what we're really deciding is what type of decision maker I want to be. What sort of person do I want to be? Do I want to be someone who just goes for it, or do I want to be someone who sits down with the grid and assign value? So I think it is a bit of both, and I do think we probably hope we're in the former grid sense, because then it's much more neat and it feels like we've got more control. But actually, I think sometimes you just got to take a sort of leap of faith. Does the transformative stuff comes into it, Jonathan?
So in the article I read, which again, as I say, is a short précis of longer stuff to be absolutely fair to them, They didn't mention the transformative experience stuff. And I do think actually another time it'd be really fun to have a chat with you about the transformative
Yeah.
work. There's some really interesting things in there, but they didn't get to it, and so it just felt like exactly what it was, which was pushing back on a particular model, that rational choice theory. And I'm to an extent perfectly comfortable with the pushback, but it just seemed a bit of an exceptionless pushback, and I just wanted to sort of think, well, sometimes actually working through those options can give you a really useful scaffolding, to then so you know the old, if you're stuck on a decision, flip a coin, assign one decision to heads, the other to tails, and then when you see it land, what's your emotional response to that? And
Yes.
then that tells you quite a lot. um I was kind of at least wanting to push and say, could we not do that with the rational choice theory stuff and say, plug it all in, what falls out, this option, okay, now how do you feel about that, does it? And so I wondered about a more nuanced, guidey
Yes.
way of using that stuff, but yeah, it was an interesting read, I thought. But there were some exceptions or exemptions to it that I wanted to be able to talk about. And you've been reading about religious exemptions and philosophical exemptions.
Yes, I came across this little article about a court case in America, which absolutely fascinated me. And it's one of those things where I don't have any clear thoughts generally, but I particularly don't have any clear thoughts in this instance. So it's about a court case where it's around religious exemptions for vaccines. So there's a new statute. It's called Equal Protection for Religious Religion. And it was 2023, and it allows people to say, well, for religious reasons, I'm not going to have the vaccine. This is in West Virginia, and then obviously some people who are immunocompromised have got together and go, actually, this might threaten my education, et cetera, et cetera. And so they went to court, and what it turned out is that the governor, as you can tell, I'm not really a favour with all the American terminology, but the governor was sort of rubber stamping everything, because they expanded it from religious exemption to religious and philosophical exemption.
Wow.
And then there's this big fight, and the judge has given people homework to try and differentiate religious and philosophical exemption. I mean, I'm interested in the law stuff, but I'm more interested in what that distinction might be, and what would justify exemptions at all. So, so they cite things like, the reasoning is, look, pragmatically, in a world we live in, there's lots of spiritual new agey type things, and actually it's just really hard to know what a religion is. So there's a massive administrative burden, just basically wave everyone through. But obviously the people wanting to make it a little bit a bit harder, saying, well, no, you can't. It's called religious exemption, and you can't just wave everyone through, because then what's the point of having the rule at all? And then the thought was, well, we should do it by case, etc. Anyway, for me, the really interesting thing is, first, what counts as enough of a religious view? So that was my first thought, was like, so if I just say, hey, yeah, I believe God, I go to church every Christmas, and I go to church weddings, and I'm religious. Oh, and by the way, I don't want to have a vaccine. That doesn't really seem like sufficient reason. And then my thinking, well, how do you measure that? Is it that they have to have at least cited God as a reason for doing certain things in their lives, or whatever? And I've using God as, I mean, the fact there's lots of things in there. You could have said gods or whatever. So there's a whole broad thing. And then there's other thought, which is, if philosophical's in there, then what about political, right? And philosophical. So it just feels like it's, oh, I'm a Marxist, I don't want to have a vaccine, or I'm a libertarian, I don't want to have a vaccine. And you just think, well, it's just, if you introduce that, it's a problem already, but introducing philosophical stuff as exemption just seems to be a right mess. I don't know what you think, your sort of first reactions to that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting question. And I will, just before I get into that, just apologize to our American listeners, for our many thousands of American listeners who I'm sure are outraged by our lack of understanding of American legal and political structures. We apologize to all of you and love you dearly. Rate the podcast 5 stars. Thank you. Um, but in I mean, the philosophical exemptions just has to not be right. I mean, if suppose that I say to you, okay, so you want me to have a vaccine and you tell me some story about this being important for general public health, right? And I say, okay, look, I'm a solipsist. I believe that I am the only person who exists, right? I'm some kind of ultra Berkeleyan who's run the whole, my senses just don't confirm anything to me. All I can be confident about is me and my thinking. So all I am, I'm the all that there is. So I'm not going to say have a vaccine, right? No, that just cannot be grounds for an exemption. So, or at least if we're thinking about vaccines in the context of public health, we're thinking about them in terms of managing financial budgets for healthcare. That must be preposterous, because you've already had to assume the falsity of solipsism in order to get to those kinds of economic structures.
Mm-hmm.
So philosophical exemptions has to be too broad. But I don't know, the fact that there is a blurry line between what you would think of as like a robust religious exemption, where you have an established and recognized religion that looks like it affords particular rights and obligations on its members, such that they are within their full religious commitments to request a religious exemption. There's a blurry boundary between that and then the less religious, more spiritual positions, right? I suspect that at some point you need to not be ideological about this, and you're just going to have to draw a big, clunky, ugly line somewhere and say, well, if you're on that side of it, you get an exemption, and if you're on the other side, you don't, because this is too hard.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's really good insight. And I was also thinking maybe just don't think of exemptions as a blanket thing and just do it literally case by case. So, okay, Jill, you want exemption, tell me your reasons and how it's affecting you, blah, blah, blah. And then you just make decisions. And it could be, you might be a died in the war libertarian, and you've signed up and you've got all these things, and it makes differences to your schooling for your kids, and it makes differences to your partner choices, it makes all these other things. You say, oh, okay, I can see that. Whereas someone who could cite religion, but it does so in a way that doesn't seem to have any effect on anything they do, they would say no. So I think maybe, obviously there's problems with because but it looks more authentic, more than trying to draw some kind of arbitrary line here. I mean, what about atheism? Is that a religious exemption? Can you have religious exemption for that?
I thought about that when you were talking about it, and I just thought, no, I don't want to get stuck into that one. But I liked your point about it seeming to be important, if it's going to be a religious exemption, that it has to, in some senses, flow from the religiosity of the belief, that's the explanation for it. But I wanted to throw out a really silly edge case just to see what you think, right?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's not silly, actually. Maybe people genuinely think this. So suppose someone has a deep conviction, a deep belief in the existence of God, such that they believe themselves to regularly commune with God. So they have that kind of interaction through prayer and so on. And they turn around and say, God has told me to not have a vaccine. But maybe this person isn't a member of any particular kind of religion. They just have that deep personal conviction, that deep personal faith. Where does that person go here?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's tough. I mean, but I guess my thought was in that. So I was reminded when you're speaking of, in certain religions, you get cults developing because people just say things, and the response is, well, how can we triangulate what you're saying with things like you're relying on, like scripture? Where in the scripture does it say you can have these news revelations because, you know, the last words of the Bible are about not having any further revelation. So you just think, yeah, so I think that would be a response. Like, what other information can we marshal in here to try and not validate? You can't validate, but at least say, yeah, sure. And you've had 5 other experiences, and you've talked to this spiritual leader, and you've cited this.
Yeah.
You know, so I'd be very interested. I mean, not interested enough to probably do it, but I'm very interested to look at the legal stuff. What does it actually say about religion and religious exemptions in this case? But I think the reason I thought it was interesting it was not because like I say, I haven't got any really secure views on it, but that really made me interesting that this is something that's having practical, you know, serious practical implications, and obviously the political element as well in it. And if so, then this shows that rigorous thinking on this area. I mean, the judge gave them the homework. The lawyers the homework, distinguish between philosophy and religion, and that sounds like an philosophy essay to me.
It absolutely does. Yeah.
So I thought that was very interesting. Yeah. So I mean, you've read something on money or being worth, you know, prizes or something. So I'm interested in that because I'm going to be rich if I do my job right. Is that right?
Right. So, I mean, I was going to say that the stuff we were talking about in religion was the $1 million question to give you the.
Can you link yourself?
Well, I just have. So,
yes.
so evidently,
yes.
So yeah, this is a recent announcement about the Berggruen Prize being awarded to Michael Sandel, who is a very prominent, very famous guy working in philosophy. And I want to make it absolutely clear from the outset here, right? The Berggruen Prize was awarded to Michael Sandel. He gets $1 million for having won this prize, and I am quite sure that his work is brilliant and fantastic, and I do not want to make this about his work at all, right? The thing that I'm really interested in is this idea of prizes in academia, and this was a hook to hang that on. So the Berggruen Institute is a think tank that every year, I think is every year or every other year, awards a prominent philosopher a prize of $1 million in recognition of their work. And the citation here, I think, from the chair of the Berggruen Prize jury says, Professor Sandel's work has left a profound mark on the global intellectual landscape. His critiques of neoliberalism, meritocratic ideology, and populism speak to the most urgent questions of our time. So the guy has done great work. I think he's done some stuff on publicizing and promoting philosophical work online. So absolutely all the chops there. But without wishing to sound sour grapes about the fact that my tin pot contribution in comparison has not been so recognized, how do we feel about financial prizes for academic work like this? And philosophy is not unique in having this. The Berggruen is sometimes described as being the Nobel of philosophy. $1 million for, I don't know, there's something in there that just makes me slightly uneasy. I cannot put my finger on it. So is this professional jealousy from me, Andy?
Absolutely, I think you should.
Good. We'll finish there.
No, obviously not. So I think so I'm just trying to work out. I felt a bit uneasy by it, and I'm trying to think maybe you share some of the things. So first is, if you put a prize money, then you might work towards that rather than searching out for, you know, doing things for the truth and all that sort of stuff. The other thought is that's a very particular view of philosophy and a snapshot of Anglo philosophy, right? So here's someone who works in, it might be saying, let's prize that. And it's also, I guess, raising up certain values and ways of doing philosophy. So this is what we think as, you know, the group, this is important. I think that was my first thought, that may be part of the worry. I wondered, does your point generalize to all prizes? So you mentioned the Nobel Prize, right? So does it generalize to, you know, so physicists doing some really cool stuff and they're getting, I mean, it's not as much, is it? It's like 500. I can't remember. It's not as much as $1 million, I don't think. But does it make you feel uneasy in that sense, or is it just in this philosophy case?
It was something that I was wondering about, and I think I might feel it less keenly in these other disciplines because they're not my own, right? But but I think I am just a bit uneasy about prizes in academia generally, for all of the reasons that you mention. And I think part of what it is that it's really, really hard, I think, to provide a deep assessment of academic intellectual contribution, right? Maybe it's easier in other disciplines. Maybe there will be folks who work in maths and physics in the comment folks who will tell us that actually we're wrong, and it's really easy to assess the intellectual merit and contribution of particular pieces of work, and that would be fine. But inevitably, it's a snapshot at a point in time, and it's going to be shaped by all sorts of cultural norms. And is it also going to creep in that actually so and so, their intellectual contribution was great, but there's something problematic about them as an individual? Or do we not count the problematicness of them as an individual? And I just start to worry that we're doing that thing where we're lauding individuals in a way that's really quite hard to triangulate, and that the assessment criteria don't necessarily remain fixed and rational and sensible. Just feels like. So yes, in answer to your question, sorry, I'm drifting. I do think that the worry generalizes, but if folks want to tell me I'm wrong, then I would of course accept the pushback.
What about prizes for people who don't often get recognised, or voices that don't get heard? So obviously, this Sandel's gets lots of press now, and he's the one driving the Ferrari around campus. It's easy to spot that sort of stuff. Other cars are available. So, but that's what one of the outcomes of the prize is, more visibility. And one of the problems with certain groups, like Black academics, etc., is about role modeling, visibility. Do you think that prizes in that might be there might be a good reason to have prizes that you feel as equally as uneasy?
No, I think that's a helpful contrast, and I think if it's a specific goal of a particular prize, that what it's trying to do is to elevate work from in that kind of a way, then I'm much more comfortable with what's going on there, I think. Although again, I would struggle to articulate my reasons, I think, in full. But I mean, just to give you a list, to be fair to the Berggruen Institute, so we walk through all of the people who've won. So 2016, Charles Taylor; 2017, Honora O'Neill; 2018, Martha Nussbaum; 2019, Ruth Bader Ginsburg; 2020, Paul Farmer; 2021, Peter Singer; 2022, Kojin Karatani; and 2023, Patricia Hill Collins. So it's a broad church, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe I'm feeling uneasy about nothing.
Is it the money? So if they just got a nice shiny medal or a plaque for their wall, is that the issue?
I think it might be part of it, but then I also look at some of the what goes on at the American Philosophical Association. There are annual awards, and people, I don't think that the cash remuneration is very significant, but they go and they give the particular lecture series and they're lauded for it. And we're elevating individuals. We're holding them up and saying, look at this person, rather than leaving the work in the journals, in the books, and engaging with it. And I think maybe that's at the heart of what worries me. But again, I am for a philosopher who is supposed to be articulating their reasons on a podcast where we discuss how all of this works. I am not doing a great job, other than just going, yeah.
That's fine. That's how we often just talk and teach. What I mean, just to finish off on this, I guess, but I was thinking, I wonder if it's to do with academia, in terms of one thing that we're notoriously bad about, although the non-academic world would laugh at this, is self-aggranding, saying how good we are at things. So one of the problems is saying actually we're really good, and we publicize it. Whereas I guess in industry, people are much better at that. And I wondered if you'd be so imagine that someone's getting a $1 million prize for some cool whizzy machine that they've designed. Do you have any worries out? Is it academia that's the problem here?
Oh, it's a good question, Andy. I'm instinctively responding the same way in that case and saying I'm not a massive fan of that
Right.
kind of thing either. Um, but then if you say to me, is the idea of remunerating someone for their contribution a basically acceptable one? My answer is yes, I think it is. So maybe I am simply being intensely self-contradictory and hypocritical.
We can live with that. Well, that's fine.
We can. I will continue to reflect on this case, but I would be really interested to hear from other folks whether they think this kind of prize giving, prize awarding thing in academia or outside is a virtuous thing, whether it creates those kind of perverse incentives you were talking about, whether it's okay in some cases and not in others. But again, props to Michael Sandel, who I'm sure is a very worthy winner, and he's done some great work. So again, this is not about him, and the other folks who have won have also done great work. So again, I am not
Yes.
having a pop at anyone on that list, just to
Great.
be absolutely clear. Um, and having talked myself into a very small corner, I think we should stop there, Andy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, yeah.
So thank you everyone for listening and making it this far through. If you've enjoyed the podcast, give us a rating wherever you're listening to this, and be sure to subscribe. In the meantime, we'll be keeping an eye on what's going on in the world of philosophy, and we'll be back next time to continue to talk to you about all of our incredibly insightful reflections, as I've managed there. And until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.